Welcome all attendees to the Global Soccer Conclave to the first day and first session of the second hall, that is Sports Tech and Athletic Management. I welcome all the esteemed panelists who are there with us for the exciting discussion on Sports Tech and Athletic Management. I welcome Mr. Sam Joseph, who is a sports scientist with World Performance based in Brisbane, Australia. He's a ASCA Level 2 strength conditioning coach with a vast experience in professional, semi-professional and school level of sports with multidisciplines. He also holds a master's degree in sports science from Deakin University and a bachelor in exercise and sports science with first honors from the University of Queensland. Welcome, Sam. Welcome to GSC.
Thanks, Amal. Thanks to everyone for having me and looking forward to being a part of this.
Great. So next speaker we have is Dr. Kevin Kellard. He's an exercise physiologist and a performance scientist who is now venturing out into a new sports tech called ATM with an athlete management environment. He is instrumental in setting up the High Performance Center of Tyndall Sports in IIS Bellary, that is Inspire Institute of Sports, which has fetched good results, including 1 gold for India in all of recently concluded Olympics. And Kevin was also part of that team for working that medal. He's also working on many scientific projects for bringing out high performance. Welcome, Kevin. Welcome to GSC.
Thanks to host me.
The next speaker we have is Mr. Neelkant Raju, who is the CTO of Shermblind Healthcare Innovations with a strong background in multiple domains such as storage technologies, data security, big data, cloud services, ad marketing, and sports technology. Wow. An engineer by profession, but passionate by sports. And he's working in the sports industry and making use of technology for performance enhancement. Welcome, Neil. Welcome to the discussion at GSC.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hope we have a great discussion.
Yes, sure. So as the technology has some glitches, we had some things, some issues to be faced, but nevertheless, we are starting again, and I'm sure we'll have a good session with you all guys today. So basically, we are living in midst of unusual occurrences that have been there in last few generations, like a society-wide shift, whereby the last millennium has seen the fundamental change where we have moved from society where we were respecting the metallic things or the materialistic things to the age of information. Now money, as it was used as a currency, the new currency is the information. So the proverb that knowledge is power, now we should say that technology is the power or the information is the power, and with that we are moving ahead, and sports is not an exception to it. So with that background, I would like to ask Sam, how has the utilization of technology for athletic management changed over last 5 years, according to you?
Yeah, I think there's been a massive change recently. I think previously we kind of just got by on what we saw on the coach's intuition and kind of, for lack of a better word, guessing with a bit of education behind us. Whereas now, it previously might, for us to get some information about someone physically, maybe their hamstring or maybe some force platform testing, you'd previously have to go to a university if there was one close by. It would take a lot of time to test them, and then you couldn't get the data because you needed someone with a PhD to kind of get that out. But what we've seen recently, particularly in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of technology come through in the fact that a strength and conditioning coach, a sports scientist, someone in the performance team can now test a player, assess, see how they're going, and then make a decision quickly rather than having to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks to get the information from a university. So I think that's been our big shift in the last 5 years, particularly, at least from our point of view. We've seen that pretty heavily in Australia. And now that university students come through knowing how to use this kind of technology across the world now, it's really going to raise the standard in what we can do for our athletes and for our professional sports teams. And even that will filter down to our semi-professional teams also, and then eventually down to our school kids. So to see, that's, I think, for mine, is the biggest change in the last 5 years, and how accessible technology is becoming and how much more information we can gather and then subsequently use very, very quickly also.
That's right, Sam. So Neil, I'll come to you. That what are your views on the impact of technology in football in future, or at present time and in future ahead? Neil, you're mute.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you see, technology has already greatly enhanced sports in the recent years, right? For the athletes as well as spectators. In fact, it can be said that when it comes to the current generation, everything they do and experience has some kind of a tech element in it. Like some of the areas which are like heavily influenced by technology today are like, say, athlete training and monitoring, talent scouting, use of technology on the field to improve game experience, like goal line tech, video assisted referee, and lots more, right? And on top of that, fan engagement is another space where there is a huge influx of technological innovations like high-tech stadiums, game-related apps, sports merchandise accessibility apps, and so on and so forth. So if you summarize, in order to make sports, remain appealing to this and future generations, we'll have to keep integrating and improving the technologies and their use continuously.
Rightly said, Neil. So, Kevin, you see that these guys were talking more about technology and its future and all. So, how do you see the technology and its application for the injury prevention and bringing out some prediction about these injuries in today's world? And is there any difference that it can make in the terms of injury prevention and prediction?
Yeah, obviously, data is really important to understand the status of the player. But in my opinion, there is something that we absolutely should be careful about. There is this big trend at the moment into machine learning and then trying to gather all the data together and predict something, and we lose track of what is actionable by doing that. So for me, the future is to really be able to segment, to separate different kind of data and create a strong link between this data and what you can do. Because if I come up with a risk number, whatever, from all the data I collect, the wellness, strength, power, fatigue, whatever, and then I tell you, oh, there is a risk, but what you can do? Now you know that there is a risk, but what do you do? So it's very important at this stage to be able to identify what is a modifiable factor that you have, a non-modifiable factor, what is fitness, what is the surface risk, what is, so now to segment those data, then you have an actionable element, which by the way, the sport itself is one of the items. If you do soccer, you have probably 10 times or 15 times more risk than if you do powerlifting. That's just fact. So you know that this risk is this, and then it's going to go up and down, but anyway the risk will be higher than for a powerlifter. So understanding all these elements will help the practitioner to know that this is what I can do, this is what is there anyway, and this is the direction I'm going to take, or the decision I'm going to make. That's what I want to say about that.
Yes. So Sam, you being working at Wall Performance for a quite long time, and Wall being a big brand in terms of performance enhancement and bringing out, cutting edge technology for that. So with that, how do you see that this kind of technology best used for monitoring of physical capabilities and screenings, and then deciding whether an athlete does have any physical deficiencies or something during their entire rehab process from when they're actually returning back to play from an injured state, or maybe if they are not injured but they are just physically weak in a pre-season time and they are just returning back to a fitness level, pre-fitness level. So in that case, how this can contribute?
Yeah, it's a great question there, Amol. So probably the easiest way to start is in the fact that the job of a sports scientist or anyone in performance is, as even a coach, is to understand how performance is achieved. And we know on the physical side, or at least away from the actual pitch side, we know that we've got to, if we can keep our best players on the park for longer, we're going to win more games. And the club's going to do better and the team's going to win more, and that's just great for everyone. So it's our job in the performance side is to understand for us what it makes a good player, what keeps them on the field, how can we hopefully stop them from getting hurt. And then we know that's never going to happen to completely stop. But it's our job to understand what can we modify, what can we change. As Kevin said, what do we know will help us keep them on the field as well. So the kind of the best practice approach realistically would be to see, all right, understand the sport and work backwards from there. So our strikers need to be fast, highly technical, understand this demand. With our testing capabilities, so whether that's on four specs, we might know that they might need to produce a certain amount of power, or they might need to be a certain amount of asymmetry that we know that's going to keep them on the park and keep them performing optimally. How do we get that data is then the other thing as well. So do we do it at the start of the season? Do we start in pre-season? How often do we do that then as well? So the best way to really comprehend and use all this information is that we can get a structured, reasoned approach. Ideally, we know exactly what performance is in every state of the mind in terms of that's tactical, physical, whatever. We don't know that, unfortunately. It's going to take time to get and years to get. We will get there eventually, though. What we can see, if we can, at the start, when that player comes in, we know their baselines are identified. Yep, their left leg is weak comparatively to the right. They've had a recent ACL injury. Okay, cool. That's our starting point. And we can start building from there, understanding their baselines, deficiencies, flaws, and then hopefully getting them back to performance and then performing well. And we can then monitor see what's dropping, see what's falling. Hopefully things are getting better with training, and keep them hopefully on the park longer and then performing better. So I think the best users of technology understand what they can do with the tech. They know what they're looking for, and then understand their players well enough, as Kevin said, to know what we can actually use, and then hopefully drive that to a higher level performance. And that's pretty much what Volve does in trying to help people understand what their players can and can't do. Because unfortunately, barbell speed and barbell weight isn't exactly everything. But we can get that information, pull it in, and understand who needs what to hopefully get them to perform better as well.
Yeah. So basically, it is important to have a baseline, physical fitness assess, because it's the basis for everything when we translate into performance. And Neil, being from an engineering background, you see a lot of technology stuff these days, and you're actually working with that in the field of sports. But being from an Indian perspective, because what Sam said, many of these technologies are readily available in the developed nations, especially in the developed football ecosystems, I would be calling that. But as you see, Indian football scenario and the state, what we face issues in India, how do you see these technologies which were mentioned earlier? They are available to Indian market or Indian, I would say, the footballers, and in near future, what do you see the scope of development?
Okay. Let's not even talk about future technologies, right? Many of the current technologies which are used in, like, say, Europe Union or in Australia, these are not yet used in India, primarily due to high cost of adoption, sometimes due to lack of localization, and in rare cases, even due to cultural differences. So not to mention, most of these new systems are like expensive, even without taking into account the price inflation due to our high exchange rates, right? That's why it's highly important that we support and promote local sports tech startups to bridge the gap and enhance the game experience in India. This is especially true when it comes to high performance management solutions or in training space. That's because a lot of the recent startups, they focus more on gamifications or fan engagements, and we should focus much more on training and performance monitoring also.
But Neil, don't you believe that we have a mindset that high price indicate high quality? So if we go on something which is a lower one, will actually compromise the things, because these startups may not have considered a lot of quality issues which are there when we compare to the Western countries or developed nations and their technologies. What do you have to say? I mean, your personal opinion. I know this is an unending topic and we can go on discussing, but
to summarize it, right? So the problem is behind within, like, say, comparing an expensive overseas product to a not so expensive Indian product. But then the price factor is also a big factor where customers decide whether to go and purchase a particular product or not. But if you see the technological challenges, whether it's an Indian made company or an Australian company or US or EU for that matter, the technological challenges are the same when it comes to everybody. And the current, the way we have improved even in our country, the way we have already created a lot of technological, for the lack of word, jambawans in the country during the recent past. So I don't think there is a lack of or dearth of technology companies which can build such what do you call products. So it all comes down to following a very strict line of protocols while building such technologies.
Yeah, yeah. So Kevin, I'm not forgetting you, but I'm just coming back to you, taking one more question with Neil, because it's something related here. Neil, we have good technologies even as a startups, and good solutions in Asian context also. Like, for example, China is doing great with the technology and bringing out a very low cost solutions. So why there is this difference between the Chinese technology and solutions, and their supremacy in the technology, and the gap in Indian startups in terms of sports techs?
Yeah, so the gap actually is not in the technical competence or in the quality of the product, rather how localized it is, right? So most of the Chinese apps, if you see, even the training apps or the technological apps which comes out of China or Korea for that matter, they are highly customized and localized for the users. The coaches or the CEOs or even the athletes are very comfortable using their apps, while in Indian context, like we have a huge gap when it comes between just North India, Middle India, and South India, right? So coming
I
up with a
agree.
localized solution for India is a pain, literal
I
pain.
know, that's why the PM of the country is saying vocal for local things and all. So yeah, I do agree. So Sam, how do you think that the best practice would be for incorporating sports technologies within the elite and semi-elite and developing athletes? I mean, according to you, how will you? Because the level of participation, the resources are different at different levels. Sometimes you may not have the best resources at a lower level where it is actually needed, because the technology use is more important for the at grassroots and developing athletes, although it's more important for the developed athletes, but still there are implications. And how do you see that this transition will be there and the best practices behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are definitely some, compared to what you see at the professional level to development level, it's a very, very broad spectrum. Some of the richest clubs actually exist in the middle somewhere. They may not have the performance, but they've got someone backing them with a lot of money. However, the principle remains the same. You need to know what you're doing for once. So like particularly with the VOL product. So someone would implement force decks for a range of reasons, like performance monitoring or injury rehab, and then monitoring the rehab throughout the time, or just general performance improvements. And we've tried to make our product that way so that you get the most value for what you're doing across all. But good use of technology is firstly understanding what you're trying to do and what you're trying to look for. And then two is understanding how you're going to implement that data. And that can be done from the lowest levels to the highest level. So the best users at the highest level, they understand their sport and they understand their athletes. So they might use a Nord board, and particularly in football, it's a good example. So we know that hamstring injuries are one of the most common injuries in football. So the reason why you'd use a Nord board would be, all right, if I know my athletes don't pull at least this amount of newtons on the Nord board, they've got a high chance of injury. So we can use that then data. So we test them at the start, see where they're at, get a gym program in or things like that, or make a modification, and then see where they're at after that. And that's, whilst very, very simple, that's good use of technology, because one, you've figured out what you need to do with your athletes, and two, that's going to help them play better. And it can be that simple. It's really just understanding what you want to do. Then on the lower levels, you might only see a Nord board once every 12 months. That's okay. Test your athletes once every 12 months, understand where they've come from, give them a training program, and then adapt through there as well. That's also good use of technology because you're understanding what you've got. And same thing for things like a force frame or a force deck, same thing. If you understand what you're looking for and then test, adapt, test again, you're fine. And that every good piece of technology and use of technology follows that principle as well. So I think if you can follow that within whatever level you're working at, you'll be successful regardless. Of course, the higher up you go, the more potential avenues you can go down. Then it becomes a matter of understanding what matters to you and what matters to your athletes and your sport. You can get lost in the data, as has been said. Like, Kevin said that you can only use what you can use. So you don't want to have too much information floating around, and then it becomes a matter of understanding what you need. So at the highest level, you might have 4 or 5 bits of technology you've got to test every day on. And if you don't know why, it's going to be of no use to you because you can't use the information. So that's why we put out a lot of information about understanding how your NordBall data affects your chance of hamstring injury. What does my peak power and my asymmetries on my force decks matter with? What was my groin square score on the force frame? Does that matter as well? Where can I use that? How can I be effective with it as well? So at the highest level, yeah, it's understanding and blocking out the noise. But at the lowest level, it's the same things, using your information well, using your data to get a good outcome for your players, and then eventually your organization, which one shows you are good at your job, and 2, your players are going to stay on the field and they're going to win more games. And ultimately, everyone's happy about that, aren't they?
Sure. Kevin, I'm coming back to you. Sorry for keeping you waited. So, when we are talking about this technology and its application for the semi-professional, professional athletes, and also the grassroots developmental athletes and all, how do you feel that optimizing athlete management beyond the normal scope that we have discussed till now? I mean, do you see there are any other domains where tech can bring some meaningful changes which can actually revolutionize its use and its application and explode the segment of performance enhancement?
Yeah, actually, I do believe that the potential goes really beyond the data collected either through the software or through the hardware. Actually, what something maybe people don't realize is that even if there is so much growth in the tech space, the use of data, the use of tech, the accurate use, and the use of sports science in general, in most countries, there is obviously some exception like Australia, UK, or Canada, I would say, or New Zealand. But even in France, the penetration of sports science itself is still very low. And especially if you look at, okay, I want to train female athletes, youth athletic development, environmental training, all those kind of, last discovery of the 10, 15 years. All that is not known simply. And I think technology can have a role not only into analyzing data and collecting data and all, but also to inform about science and help spread the evidence-based practice all around the world. So just like Sam said with the NordBall, for example, where, okay, you have those data, but we're gonna provide you some kind of insight into what these data mean. I think it's our responsibility, especially looking at India, it's our responsibility to provide a technology with the context around that technology. And technology can help spread knowledge about female athletes, relative energy deficiency, menstrual cycle tracking, the youth athletic development programs. For example, you have the FIFA 11 Plus, right? It's a wonderful program, hugely validated and all. However, 80% of the clubs under FIFA don't use it. That's a statistic I've seen. Though it could be more or less that. But what is important is that you have something validated. You have a burden of hamstring and ACL injury. You have something to prevent it by half, almost, depending on the studies. And still, it's not used. So I think it's our role also as technology to bring that into the clubs. Okay, we provide you technology, you can collect data and look, those data mean that, and you can actually do this to reduce your injuries. It's very simple. We implemented everything inside. So that way, I think we can improve the practices all around the world, in addition to facilitate their data analysis, their data collection, and whatever they already want to do. We can also kind of guide them. And that's what I think is very interesting in tech.
Yes, Kevin. So taking your question further, I would like Sam to answer on, see, Kevin was mentioning about collecting data and then analyzing it and then getting in a meaningful information out of it. So World has done a great job in getting pulling out very much normative data in a lot of places. You know, can you shed us some light that how this data is being actually brought into practice for taking out some meaningful protocols for rehabilitation or something like that? If World, I mean, at World, you guys are doing that.
Yeah, so we're very big involved on, while we do make the technology and provide it out, we want to make sure that people are using it well, and we understand that there can be knowledge gaps around the world. Like, we're not expecting everyone to be a guru on hamstrings like Dr. David Opar is, who actually was one of the first people that looked at the Nord board. That's not everyone has that information, nor should they have to. But you don't have to be a PhD level scholar to understand that if you have a imbalance 15% more or more on your knowledge score, that's going to increase your hamstring injury risk. You shouldn't have to be a PhD again to know that if you have a 10% drop in your groin squeeze score, that you're probably going to have some sort of adductor related injury shortly. Again, that's public knowledge. That's research that's come out on the back of having technology like this. And now there's particularly within football, that's where most of the research has been done in football, which is great for particularly the Soccer Conclave here, is that we know that in football players, that if we have these risk factors of greater than 15% imbalances on a Nordic, or greater than 10% drop in a force frame groin squeeze score, that we know that injury could potentially be coming here. We've got a high risk of that happening. And so as practitioners, we need to go, hey, we need to do something here and do something about this. So yeah, we've published a lot of normative data. So right now we've just released the 2020-2021 European Football Report, and it showed how it's progressed from 2015, 2016, when the Nord board first started getting into professional football, all the way up to now. And we've seen a gradual increase in Nordic hamstring scores. And of course, we're probably now seeing less hamstring injuries, and we're getting smarter about it and how we can manage these. Of course, you're never going to eliminate injury, but we're knowing now that if we keep this strength up, and we can get better. Same with the force frame. We've seen force frame groin squeeze scores increase dramatically as well, given that now it's a focus of training and we're starting to reduce these injuries, and that's got a on-flow effect. If you had an ACL injury and you had a hamstring graft, what's going to be sore? Hamstring along with the ACL. So then we use the Nord board to test the hamstring and see how that's going in the ACL rehab as well as that, because a hamstring graft does damage the hamstring, believe it or not. So with that information, it makes managing your athletes and managing this process much easier. And so at Bob, we'll continue to kind of push this information out as soon as we have it, and then the more data, as it's probably maybe more Kevin's alley here, but the more data we get in from more places, the better we can make this information for everyone. And so that, people that maybe don't have the privilege of having a Nord board because, they work with a very, very level club, but they know if you're weak in your hamstrings, you're going to get injuries. And ultimately at that level, one star player is making the difference. And if you can keep them on the field, how are you doing your job? So yeah, we'll keep proceeding to get more and more information out there, and hopefully as we get more and more throughout the world, particularly through India as well, that'd be great, and the Asian continent, of understanding how their leagues compare to the EPL, given the maybe a bit less resource, but hopefully eventually we'll have this nice big port of information where we know that a top tier footballer is this strong in his hamstrings, is this strong in his groins, can jump this high, and the tactical skills do this. So we know that we can help screen, talent identification, and then ultimately getting the best outcome for everyone involved.
Sam, I'm going to come on this. It's a very nice point you have brought out, but with this normative data, which is being gathered and more research being done. So Kevin also told us that, yes, we will derive a lot of information and then devise a lot of preventive program and preventive strategies out of it. But let me ask quickly to Neil that how do you, how will you address the issue of data security and, data privacy issues, which are very much linked with these things? Because when one technology company in one country giving solution to other country, how do you comply with the laws of land and the data privacy issues and everything? So in sports tech, that will be a significant contribution, I think, which will affect the use of technology in that particular country or continent per se, and your views on it.
Right. So, to start off, I feel like we should understand what kind of data we're dealing with, right? So we call data which are collected through, hardwares, and then some through softwares, some, regular data. So these kinds of data, we finally collect them as what is called as heterogeneous data, right? So basically they are not the same kind of data. They can be in any forms, Excel sheets, server data on cloud, etc., etc. And again, these can belong to different countries. Some can come from Indian players, some can come from Australian players for that matter, right? So then when all this comes into picture, there are particular laws you have to follow, right? The couple of privacy laws which are already in place for privacy is, one is the CCPA from US, and then there is GDPR from EU. So they define how a technology software company is supposed to handle data when it belongs to a particular person from the EU. He's protected by the GDPR privacy policy. And these you have to take into account while you're building the software itself. It's not something you can, like, say, add on as an afterthought, right? Say, I really cannot stress how important data privacy and data security are in the current scenario. Like, so we've had many instances in the recent years where, like, say, infiltrators and hackers have successfully hijacked or exposed medical and financial information of affected companies, right? A primary reason for such occurrences is that most of the systems built, like, say, a decade back, use legacy systems or outright, added data security and privacy as an additional feature on top of their product. So in order to safely work with athlete performance and medical data, your platform needs to be, like, designed with privacy and security as its core feature, and athlete tracking and monitoring as an additional feature. In fact, like, there are sufficient security and compliance certifications out there which enable a company to conduct regular audits on its systems. And though implementing and following these compliance process can be cumbersome and costly, it's still a small price to pay when compared to the alternative, right? Focusing on preventive measures is the only way to safely and securely handle athlete data. So,
I agree on that part. But an interesting thing that I have, I have my understanding is, when you have a lot of data and when you know a lot of meaningful thing like the injury status, like Kevin has presented before, that it can be used for injury prediction or some more medical data and all. Can it be not the basis for getting an overage or undue advantage to one particular team or a country in a professional football where money is at stake and the teams are playing obviously for honor and preserving that, but money is the main motive behind that, and a lot of things are at stake. So if suppose if tomorrow you in a Champions League, some data is leaked, and because of that the opponent gets an advantage over it. So how will you deal with these situations? Because these, with technology will come more responsibilities. And
True. Yeah. So, in fact, I have to reiterate, right? So, it's they say, right, there's no use crying over spilled milk. It's like that. So once there is a breach, there is very little you can actually do. So you only have to work on preventing security and privacy leaks. It starts off with your architecture design itself, basically your system design itself. When you come up with a data tracking software or data monitoring software, I'm sure Sam would agree, because they do a lot of data collection, and it's paramount importance that this data is secured in a highly secure architecture. And there's another thing which you have to remember is, like, who is the owner of data, right? So to whom does this data belong to? Like, the first person obviously is the athlete himself. Any data collected on the athlete, the athlete is the owner of the data. So he has to have complete access to the data, no matter what security protocol you build. But on top of that, you also have to understand, like, medical data, you cannot expose medical data to everybody in the team or outside the team. So there are a lot of do's and don'ts when it comes to handling athletes medical data, especially, right? Where you store it, to whom you can share, what sort of security protocols you're supposed to build, in the place where you're going to store such data. Are you having encryption or not? Who has access to the data? so on and so forth. So this is actually a completely in-depth topic we can jump into. But on the overall summary, I just have to say that there is no such thing better than being preventive access. So you really have to know the do's and don'ts of handling medical and performance data before you start saying that, hey, we do data collection.
Yeah. Sam, can you shed light on any specific case where you can use the technology for athlete recovering from an injury, or bringing out some specific physical measurements for the betterment of their athlete who is recovering?
Yeah, so what you just said there as well, like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the more you can spot early, the best chance you're going to have of getting on top of things. So the classic football example, it would probably be, let's go a hamstring injury. Let's make it easy. Let's not get too deep into an ACL. But you would screen at the start of the year. You would see, typically, probably before Nordics became a big part of physical preparation for football, and probably still need to be a bit further down the track. You might see someone who has 200 newtons on his left-hand side and 290 on his right. And that's quite a significant difference there. It's almost 50% difference. And you would think there, just by looking at that, if you saw someone who was, there and there, depending on the size of their, on their limbs, you'd go, hang on, that looks weird. And you'd look at that and just go, hey, there's definitely something wrong here. But because you haven't measured it, you don't know about it. So the primary thing there, if you can screen for it, which is what the Nordboard does, which is what the ForceVex do, which is what Human Track does, which is what ForceFrame does, you can help screen for things if we know things are going to be an issue, which there's a lot of data out there now to suggest there is. We can get on top of it early, get the intervention in there, and hopefully prevent this person from getting hurt or reducing the severity of the injury. But let's say that didn't happen. We just kind of let that go. Player tears a hamstring, could be anywhere between four weeks through to maybe 6 months, depending, or potentially that hamstring was maybe a problem that maybe didn't cause their ACL injury, but contributed to it. That's a year and a half off the park, depending on what level they can get rehab to. So that's probably the example there. If you can help screen and then find out, okay, there's the issue, prevent. But then, so if they did get the injury, all right, so then you either, hopefully you don't have to go for surgery, you might have to go for surgery. But then you've got an extra rehab process, extra pain upon the athlete. The club's losing money here. Probably a good point to make out. These players get paid a lot of money. They could be anywhere between $1,000 a week for a small club up to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds, or depending on where you're at. That's a lot of money. So you think if you can help prevent your star player from getting off, from not being on the pitch, you're going to win more matches. But so yes, they've now had an injury. They've got surgery. Maybe it's a 10-week recovery post-surgery. So then you've got to invest all the time for the doctor, for the physio, for the strength and conditioning coach to now retest that to make sure, all right, what are we going to do? And fortunately, if we tested at the start of the year, we've got a baseline where they are at. So we knew that left was 200 and the right was 290. That's still no good. So that's, the left is injured. It's like 100. And then you keep on building that up through training. And we know that 290 was fine for the right. 200 wasn't for the left. So, all right, we've got to get back up there to 250, 260. We get back more training and more training, more training. Eventually, we're hopefully at 290 on each side. And depending on how far you want to push that, you can keep on going. But because we had that baseline value, we can, all right, that's what we have to get this person back to. And without measuring, unfortunately, coaches are great. We can see things, but unfortunately, we can't measure forces with our eyes. So by using that information, that data that we just collected, we've got these baseline scores to know that, hey, doesn't get injured here, gets injured here, and we can start formulating and using the normative value that's been built up over years of research. We know that where we need to be. So that will probably be the best practice usage. Ideally, you screen, you test, you treat, hopefully get them going and don't have the injury. But if you do have the injury, you've got your baselines, and then you can come back and when they're back on the pitch. And that also reaffirms the athlete too. If the athlete knew they got hurt at 200 and 290, if they're at 300 on each side, they're going to be way more confident coming back on the pitch. And we know that psychological recovery is pretty important as well, along with physical. So if we can get the athlete back in that space, we're going to have athletes on park longer and people winning games and everyone happy.
Yeah. So I just got a reminder from backend that we are nearing time and all. It was a wonderful discussion, but just to take on, last couple of questions, Kevin, when you know too much in the performance segment, when you're getting support from this technology thing, when you're rehabilitating and you're getting to know, for example, in an ACL injury, as Sam discussed, we have a couple of scoring systems, and that can be pulled into an athlete management system, and we can track the rehabilitation in such a way. But there is something which is normative values, which we discussed before. So an athlete has a projection that within like 6 months or 8 months, I'll be completely back to normal. And if that doesn't happen, or he's lagging behind the endpoints, will that not cause an anxiety and actually worsen the situation? Like, had it been better if he was not knowing it at all, ignorant about it, but the technology always popped to him that yes, your this thing test is due at this time, and the athlete management systems, which usually comes up with the reminders and all. So in that scenario, what do you think?
So actually here you touch upon, I would say, two subjects. One is the current debate about ACL return to play, which is it's very recent. Like you look at the GSM, I think it's from last year, say we should move on from, no, 2016 actually. We should move on from a time base to a goal driver. So that's a change in paradigm, and we should go for that, because one of the things that has been really wonderfully explained is stop looking for quicker, because it has been shown that if you come back at 6 months, okay, you are functional, but you're gonna get re-injured. And there is plenty of guys able to bring you back in 6 months, but you're gonna get re-injured because muscle time and force time, neuromuscular time is not ligament and tendon time. And take more time to adapt, and you have all that plenty of time to prepare for a proper return to sport and then return to competition, which is another phase. So definitely goal driven and phase should be flexible. It's just an indication. Time should be just an indication. So that technology can help in that change, because it should be like you are there, and then if you complete that stage, you're gonna be to the next stage. So hopefully you're gonna come back in 9 months, but it could be 12 months, or it could be 2 years. And some even talk about, 2 years is the necessary time for ACL if you really want to make it nice. So whatever, that's the first debate. Like, I mean, it's more of a sports medicine debate, but obviously technology is helping drive this change. And the second thing is that, anxiety and all that, because if you look at hardwares, you have physiological data like heart rate and temperature, let's say. Nothing much if you stay in the performance side. Obviously there is the blood pressure, whatever, but mostly common things are like that in physiology. And then the other are more of a biochemical data, so biomechanical data. So it's more of a external load. But we know that internal internal load is very powerful in predicting, describing, I would say, training load. And we should not overlook all the validated questionnaire we have with psychometric value to assess fatigue, to assess psychology, to assess well-being. All that is really meaningful, and there is a strong evidence that biomechanical data are not necessarily better at describing what's going on with the athletes.
Yeah.
In terms of fatigue athletes and training load tolerance. And technology can bring that in the picture. So yes, there is validated questionnaire to detect anxiety, to detect any depression. You have the profile of mood state, which is very well known. You have the total recovery score. All those elements are validated, reliable, and you can use it to track the mental health of the athletes through technology. That's more of a software.
Sorry to interrupt you because of the time things and all. Just taking last question. I'm really sorry. We would have loved to continue this discussion. But moving on to Sam with the last question. That yes, Sam, we understand. I mean, just Kevin was saying that it has its own time for rehabilitation, and athletes should respect that part. But in professional football, where time is money and the contracts are negotiated based on that, somebody who gives a solution within the time, and if technology can help him in that way, how do you see this situation, that application of technology for earlier return to play and defining all? I mean, I know that there are some problems associated with it, and it might have some long-term issues, but how do you see as a sports scientist? Have you ever been forced to bring somebody back to normal within some time constraints? And if yes, any personal scenario?
I think everyone that's worked in sport probably has been pushed to get someone back a bit faster than they want. Everyone wants their players on the field. Same, and the players want to get back too. Like they don't want to miss time. Like they're sitting there. The reason why they play is because they want to sit down doing nothing. But it's really a fine balance. So and we're at the point in time in society where maybe 40 years ago, if we put someone back on the field when they obviously hurt, it's just toughness. Now, particularly with concussion debate's probably a good one here. If someone is concussed and we put them back and they have a secondary knock, they could have permanent brain damage. So same with any other injury as well, for that matter. If we put them back on, we're causing further. Are we, by putting them back on, causing them further damage? And so the classic one here is the ACL or the hamstring. Someone thinks they're right to go with the hamstring. It hasn't been assessed. You just go, yep, he can move. He's fine. He's already missed 3 weeks, and then he tears it again. And he's missing another 9. So you're missing 12 weeks of the year compared to what might have been 6. So there is a very, very fine line, and probably where technology comes in now, where you can actually assess and see where they're at. So with with a Nord board, you can see, okay, is there eccentric strength there? If yes, cool, move to the next phase of training. GPS as well. Like, can they hit their top speed that they know they can hit? Yep, they're at 100%. Okay, well, I've satisfied that. Now it's a matter of, okay, now we have a more line ball call of, do they have the training to be able to withstand this game? What are they likely to face in the game? How important is the game to play? And that's when it gets a bit blurry there, when you've got the information there, and then you have a choice. But now in the age of technology, we can make a choice. And if we haven't consulted any development, say we do have a Nord board and we haven't looked at it, we've just said, yeah, we can get him back on the park. That's negligence, and that's when we're going to have problems. And that's when the player can come back and say, hey, you didn't have my best interest at heart. And to be honest, they were right. That would be true. So you need to be really careful in those situations. And ultimately, it becomes a matter of, you need to explain to your players and your coaching staff that if someone's not healthy, they're not healthy. And if they aren't able to do the job, and people will get angry at that, that is going to happen. It's players don't like missing, and coaches don't like missing either. But you need to be really explicit and say, yes, they aren't ready to come back yet. And so, yeah, use of technology can be really useful there. And if you can present some data to say, hey, they're usually here, but they're actually here, that's that's on them. That's why we have doctors and physios as well that have made those line ball calls to there. But yeah, I haven't had too many tricky ones. I've been pretty fortunate in my time. But I've seen a few where people have said, yep, get him back on the field or get her back on the field, but it's clear that they want to go back on, but it's not going to work. And it's just going to end poorly. So yeah, very dangerous game. But if you can use technology and use data to support your case, it's going to be a lot easier to be on your side. And if you're teaching, you're telling your coaches, and they're hopefully learning about it, that'll then players will thank you for it later on.
Yes, great. So Neil, being a startup company and a new sports tech startup, your closing remarks on the sports tech in India and especially in football, and how do you see?
Sorry, I was facing some internet difficulties. Am I audible?
Yeah, Neil. So can you hear me now?
Yeah. I can.
So I was saying that you being from a sports tech startup in India and venturing into the performance enhancement part using sports technology, I think we lost him. Kevin, can you sum up, your last closing remarks, a short one? We still have very less time left, so please.
Yeah. So closing remark would be, I mean, there is a huge potential in sport tech for athletic management. Everything, to spare time, to give more time back to the practitioner, and then help them take meaningful decisions. That there is a huge potential, and I think technology also has some roles, like I said before, to spread the sports science knowledge. And to help very much protect the players, because in many sports we have reached kind of the physical limits of human potential, or we are very close to, especially in athletics, for example. So now the responsibility is not necessarily to improve further the physical abilities, but more to protect. So health is becoming more and more the center of our attention, instead of performance. And our global and holistic perspective, and that's what we are trying to do at AGM actually, is to have a complete holistic management of a player in all aspects of his life. And if you look at youth athletic development, you can even include the exam results to make sure that your athlete is going to have also a future career after his athletic career. So I think we can bring in something, and we should be careful about, you know, some fancy ways that can be offered to us. So just be careful about that, to follow what is useful. That's just that.
Yeah, great, Kevin. Coming back to Sam, just your closing remarks on the sports tech and athletic management, and how do you see world progressing, you know, in next 5-10 years in terms of sports tech in India and abroad in terms of football?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely going to keep improving as fast as what's come along. The world's not slowing down. Everyone's seen how fast a phone's come in 10 years. Can you imagine what sport tech's going to be like as well? And given sport is a excuse me, a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's not going to slow down because there's too many people's livelihoods on the way. So yeah, what we'll see from Volve in the future is we'll see more and more data available to help clinicians actually do their job better. Excuse me. And so with that, we'll see more, and the tech will become more and more accessible across the world. We'll see it in more places. We'll have more information to help practitioners, so that realistically everyone comes in not understanding of how to use Volve tech, how to use force decks to understand performance, how to use a NordBoard to where they're at for injury risk with a hamstring. We'll see more and more, and it'll eventually become just a standard. And Volve will try and make that as easy as for everyone, and we'll try to make educational as to ultimately help everyone else do their job better.
Great, Sam, and thank you for you all the esteemed panelists to be here, and for a wonderful session. Because of lack of time, we have to, I think, wind up here, because our session has already overshooted and the next session is about to start, and I'm just getting back calls from the back end. So thank you all for joining here. Have a wonderful day, and stay connected to GSC for next 3 days for the updates and for the wonderful sessions which are lined up. Also do be there for the awards night, which will be again a good immersive experience. Thank you all.